Hello and welcome to the Global Passivhaus Showcase, presented by Passivhaus Accelerator, a catalyst of zero carbon building. We're happy you're here. We welcome all comers to our exploration of how to slash the greenhouse gas emissions from our buildings and make them more resilient to the extreme temperatures, the wild weather, and the grid insecurity caused by climate change. So, whether you're Passivhaus curious or Passivhaus expert, this is a place to learn the do's and don'ts, the best practices and the lessons learned of Passivhaus design and construction. We'll dive into how Passivhaus design principles are applied in the real world and how this approach to construction impacts the health and happiness of the people who live and work in these buildings. Are you new to all of this? Visit the Passivhaus 101 section of our website to get started. With that, please enjoy the showcase and pose your questions in chat for the discussion session after the presentation. Thank you.
We are going to get into the program really soon. We're super excited to have the team here to talk about Harbor Village affordable housing and the Massachusetts Passivhaus boom that is underway right now. And that's very nice, Dale. Thank you for that. But before we do, we're going to go into some breakout rooms for about 6 minutes. So you're going to have time for rapid fire introductions, and that's about it. But this is a chance to get to know one another a little bit. So let me set that up. And we're really excited, as I said, about tonight's program, Harbor Village Affordable Housing, the Massachusetts Passivhaus Boom, with Michelle Apigian, Beverly Craig, and Tom Chase. And I'm really honored to introduce Bev, who is our guest host tonight. And she manages the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center's low and moderate income programs, including the Passivhaus Design Challenge for Affordable Housing, the Affordable Clean Residential Energy Program, and the Triple Decker Design Challenge. So she's a driving force behind this boom in Passivhaus in Massachusetts, as are tonight's other speakers and Passivhaus Massachusetts and many more folks. So we're honored to have her here tonight as guest host of the Global Passivhaus Showcase. So with that, Bev, please take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Zach. It's really an honor to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces.
Good night.
Oops.
And I just want to welcome everyone tonight. We are having a lot of exciting things happening in Massachusetts, and it's really a story of partnership. The two main speakers tonight are going to talk about one particular project, but it has really been a collaboration of Passivhaus Massachusetts, the MassCEC program, Department of Energy Resources, even our tax credit agency, like everybody working together, and even local communities. And so we are just really seeing amazing change. So 3 years ago, we had one multifamily Passivhaus in the state, and we are looking now at potentially 86 multifamily buildings getting certified within the next 3 years. So it's dramatic change. And so I'll just kick off a little bit talking about sort of what's behind that change. Then I hand it over to Michelle Apigian, who is one of the most experienced architects in the Northeast with Passivhaus. This is her third certified Passivhaus project. At least it's on target to get there. And then Tom, she works for ICON Archicture, and they really are doing a lot of affordable work in Massachusetts as well. Women-owned company, really leading forefront. And then Tom Chase works for New Ecology, which is a nonprofit consultant that has specialized in affordable housing retrofits over the years, and now is really working on a lot of Passivhaus projects. So you've got a really experienced team today. So I am going to kick it off by sharing my screen. I have this first slide right here has our contact information of the three of us here. I really encourage people to reach out. I think Michelle and Tom are some of the most generous people out there for advice and giving experience. Both of them have been on the Passivhaus Massachusetts board for a long time and given a lot of time. And just starting out, Massachusetts, like I said, Michelle worked on one project in South Boston, the South Distillery project. And that was really the first one in the state. And at the time, I worked for a state agency, a quasi-governmental agency, and we were seeing all the amazing work that was happening in Pennsylvania on multifamily affordable housing. We were hearing a lot of great stories about what was happening in New York, in Connecticut, New Hampshire, even some projects in Maine. And we were saying, why can't we do more of this in Massachusetts? And at the time, I think there's just a lot of concern about cost, honestly. And so we weren't having any luck getting like extra points with tax credits, and because people thought it might be too expensive. And so my agency said, hey, we don't really think it's going to be that expensive. Let's try, let's see. And so we started a program. We provided up to $4,000 per unit for 8 affordable housing projects. And you see 6 of them here. The other 2 are under construction also. And so this was really just to sort of jump start the industry, do a lot of really good tracking on where we saw costs increase and where we didn't, because I think there's a lot of sort of myths about things. And so these 6 projects, you'll see they're in a lot of different towns all across Massachusetts, some in urban Boston areas that are sort of high rises like and Cambridge and Boston. There's some that are very suburban sites. So the Hanson Village one is actually something that Dakota Partners is doing as sort of I would call it a template for a whole bunch of different sort of suburban style affordable housing complexes that they're doing. We have Harbor Village, which is going to be talked about today in the upper right there with the thin brick. I love this project. I actually, at the ribbon cutting, I walked right past it because it fit in so well with the main street in Gloucester that I didn't realize that was the building that I was supposed to be going into. And then North Commons in Northampton, there at the bottom is, it's actually the one with the highest cost of all the ones we have. And I think the reason is pretty obvious if you look at the roof line, right? Pretty complicated roof line and so most of these projects, so far the incremental costs have been surprisingly low to me. So we've seen on average 2.4% incremental cost from the initial base case. And the highest one is North Commons with that more complicated roof line. I will say it's been really interesting tracking sort of what's changed in each of these projects. In all 8 of the projects, the highest incremental cost in Massachusetts has been related to bringing fresh air to every room. So that ventilation increase that you get with Passivhaus, that's so important of that is very different than what we have in code in Massachusetts, where we only need 1 supply. And so that has for sure been the highest cost. I guess I generally think after COVID, have any of us learned, like, if we're going to pay something extra, shouldn't it be on ventilation? So I think that's actually not a very hard sell to a lot of, especially owners of affordable housing, but even in market rate, I think it translates to something that people are willing to pay a little more for. We are tracking very closely these costs, and I will say there's a little bit of a caveat, right? Massachusetts, compared to other states, our stretch code's probably a lot higher than what the base case would be in a lot of other states. These are all affordable housing also, which the owner is going to be a long-term owner. It's very mission driven. In Massachusetts, I would say affordable housing has always been sort of on the edge, the leading edge of green building. And so these are the best projects that are deciding to move up to Passivhaus. But the sales on the cost side hasn't been very hard. Of course, these projects are just starting to get done, so we don't always have the data on performance. But Michelle's first project is done. This is the Distillery in South Boston, and we're fortunate because Boston has an energy disclosure ordinance, so it's pretty easy to compare to other similar buildings. And so you'll see here, the Distillery is in green with the energy use intensity, and the lead buildings that were built in a similar time frame, similar typology, are in purple, and then the code ones are in blue. And so 62% lower EUI. That's pretty dramatic. You know, I think there's a lot of skepticism, honestly, from some policymakers about passive really performing the way that we say it will perform. And so what I would say is, like, we see similar data in Philadelphia, where there's energy disclosure ordinance. Green Building United sees 57% better for the passive house projects compared to the code ones. And we need to start building more and more of this to validate, because there is still skepticism around that. So after this, we launched our program. Passive House Massachusetts was out there lobbying really hard for our state efficiency program to do a similar offering through the MassSAVE program, and they were successful. So 9 months later, after our program was launched, MassSAVE for both market rate and affordable projects came up with a $3,000 per unit incentive for anybody who would go and get certified. And I will say, I really love how ICF and the MassSAVE program have administered this program. They have these early incentives, pre-design ones, to sort of talk the design team and the owner into seeing analyzing whether Passive House is going to be a good fit. So they provide feasibility study money and they provide modeling money. And then when you actually certify, you get this bigger incentive. And that has led to this 87 buildings. So at one point we had, I think 102 signed up. Some of those projects disappeared with COVID and didn't get their permits. And some people decided not to continue on, but we still have 86 buildings enrolled, over 5,000 units. The other thing I really like what MassSAVE and ICF and Passive House Mass have done is they've really paired it with a lot of educational offerings. And I mean, Passive House Accelerator has so much great content, but so does Passive House Mass's website. So go to that video library that's down there at the bottom if you're ever looking for additional content. And so now we're gonna jump, I'm gonna hand it over to Michelle and let her jump into the details of the projects that I know you guys are all on to hear about. Michelle?
Awesome. Yes, thanks, Beverly. That was awesome. And I'm frankly going to repeat a couple things that Beverly said, because they're just like so noteworthy and necessary to articulate how we've gotten where we're going. But fundamentally, we see Passive House as building inherent value into every building, period. And there are a lot of, it's a very complicated process. It's a very complicated path. It's not easy. But if I were to sum it up, I think that these are the 5 words that I would kind of focus on. So intention is sort of at every level, as is teamwork. Communication cannot be underestimated. And I think we often think that we are speaking in shorthand, but we really need to be more explicit. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Craft. We have long underappreciated and undervalued our building community, and we cannot do these projects without them. And so we must not only express how important the work they're doing is, but also give them the tools and the support to actually do it the way we expect it to be done. And then ultimately, as good as we all can try, mistakes happen and there are issues that have to be addressed. So confirmation is really important. Next, Beverly. Yeah. So we, as Beverly said, we started with the Distillery, top left. We completed Finch last year, which was a long time labor of love and so exciting to see come out of the ground. We now have 12 or so in the works, all committed and all on track to get there. And we're just delighted with the uptick. Next. And that is, again, just to reiterate, not in small part because of the amazing work that the state has done and local organizations have done. So we did, in 2015, this was a huge coup to acknowledge the Passive House as an alternative compliant path. But then the MassCEC incentives really, really set the stage for what became a version of the MassSAVE incentives. And there are communities out in force. It's amazing. And there are codes and et cetera. So we have to, none of these projects works without a pretty substantial team. And I think that we tend to want in our minds to make that a pretty small team, but the truth is it's just not. And so I've probably missed some people, frankly, in this team, but every one of these trades mattered. Every one of these sub-consultants mattered. And we need to be, I think, just thinking strategically about how beautiful it is to bring all that expertise together and just find the right synergies and move forward. Next, that's the building. No, sorry, Beth. So I do want to talk about communication next. Thank you. Because this is really what so we're learning how to design these buildings. Lots of architecture firms are learning how to design these buildings. Lots of mechanical firms are figuring out how to do the ventilation and figure out, if efficient heating and cooling systems that are based on that fabulous envelope that we've designed. But then you have to actually get it done in the field. And this is really what I want to focus on, which is how do we communicate our intentions to the builder and the folks that are working for the builder, the sub-consultants, right? They're sub-consultants. And so how do we speak in the language that is going to be proactive and successful in that conversation? And so they work in schedule. We work in schedule when we're in CA. As a general rule, there's often a 3-week look ahead. We talk about, end dates regularly. We talk about sequencing. And then what we often don't talk about, but I think what becomes so critical is, okay, if you know the schedule and we're talking about the sequence, who's really involved and who's going in first? Like, let's really get into that. Next. So here's an example of a 3-week look ahead. Totally do not need to read the minutiae here. The point is that we want to plug into this and we want to say, okay, where are there particular aspects of work that are starting to hit on something that's pretty critical to our Passivhaus envelope? And if that's there, then let's see that it's coming and let's plan a call in advance to involve every trade that might be involved in that line of work so that we can make sure that our assumptions about the sequence are actually accurate. And very often we find out that we made inaccurate assumptions. I know it's a shocker. Mostly accurate, but like occasionally like a few nuances. Oh, shoot, you can't do that first. Oh, darn it. So we're really working within this language. Next. And that language then gets translated into, okay, a sequence that's happening in plan that we can all kind of talk through. Red is red hot, coming soon. Orange is coming next, right? Like this is not rocket science, but it is a new way of just thinking collectively about what's coming next. And then, okay, you have that red hot spot that we really got to talk through because it has so many critical intersections and details and sequence issues and whatever. Let's get on the phone. Let's talk through it. Let's rethink it if we need to. Let's make sure that we don't have to remediate after the fact because we actually just executed it the way we intended the first time because it's new construction. Next. And so we've been more and more doing this. And next. I think ultimately it goes a long way. And then at the end of the day, we still miss things, right? We all just still miss things. There are things that can't get buttoned up until late. There are problem aspects that just are our Achilles heel. There are these really wonky weak points that we don't understand. And so this is when we need the confirmation, and we need it on so many levels. And I praise New Ecology for being on this project and just sticking with us. Thank you, Tom, because I really didn't know that we would get there. Oh, look, I'm seeing Mark. He's got the thumbs up. I mean, like, seriously, we went several extra miles to figure out, oh my God. And so with that, I think I'm just going to turn it over to Tom.
Michelle. That was great, and thanks Bev too for the intro. It's been super exciting to work on a lot of these projects and figure out how to translate from the verifier's perspective. New Ecology was the Passivhaus, the FIAS verifier on this project. A handful of the others in the CEC Passivhaus Design Challenge as well. So I think next slide. So continuing on Michelle's theme of communication, this is really a lesson in using the testing as a communication tool. So more and more we've been doing early and often with whole building blower door tests. So whole building blower door in commercial buildings in Massachusetts, not code required. Even in a lot of residential buildings, not code required. It's a passive house building. It might be the first time a team has ever done a blower door test like this. So that is a long ways off from communicating just how tight a passive house building needs to be. And these are the multiple blower door tests that we did along the way. And just looking over on the right-hand column, what that does to our air tightness as we test and explain and test and explain and test and find and correct and explain throughout. So I just want to share some photos before we jump to the Q&A. So the next slide. So this is what things look like at the first whole building blower door. A lot of intentional openings, things that aren't finished yet. So we're doing temporary construction to actually run the test, which is always a challenge in very complicated buildings. We're finding major leakage and addressing it before things get fully buttoned up. So next slide. And as we go along, we're finding smaller and smaller gaps. We're still, like you see the top of the elevator there, we're still, not quite having a fully complete whole building air barrier, but we're able to test and find the additional leakage. So next slide. Getting closer, things are getting tighter. Some things are, like these piping penetrations are interesting for folks who are learning how to do them, following not just our requirements for air barrier testing, but also the plumber's requirements and the code requirements, and how do the fire safety requirements. There's a lot going on with things like that to get those tight, which certainly did by the end of the day. And I think the last slide is really lessons learned for the next projects as well. So once we get to the end of the day, that image on the left had the whole building going, one single blower door fan, and we were able to hear the whistle of a window that arrived without its gasket complete. So to identify a broken window that could be repaired. And then another lesson learned, that image on the right there is electrical conduit, very complicated, lots of it going into the building. And something to keep figuring out for the next one. But we did get there. So big shout out to Michelle for her confidence in pushing us really to the end, and Groom as well for sticking with us, the GC there, because they went through us for each of those, I forget how many, 6 or so tests. So I think that's all I've got, and I know we want to get to the Q&A because I think there may be some interesting questions coming up.
Well, before we do that, we are going to actually stop. And if you guys, if everyone wants to unmute, let's give you guys a big cheers. Great stuff. Thank you guys for coming in, providing excellent data.
Yeah.
Feel the love.
Way to go.
Nice.
And Zach, we'll head over to you for sponsors.
All right, thank you. So everything we do at the Accelerator comes thanks to these fine organizations. These are groups that share our goal of accelerating the transition to passive house and to high performance building. So thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are SIGA and ICON Windows. Our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. Thanks also to our patron sponsors, Aero Barrier, BR+A Consulting Engineers, Brennan Air Tightness and Installation, Euroline Windows, Inotech Windows and Doors, Lamelux, Sanderson Sustainable Design, and US Engineered Wood T-Stud. So thank you to our sponsors.
All right, let's dive into questions. And it's always nice when we have new people come on the show and then they got questions. So Chen, over to you. So if you want to unmute, and everyone else, if you want to mute yourselves, and Chen, whenever you're ready, fire away your question.
Well, thank you so much. Such an honor as a new person who asked this first question. I'm just curious, like with the pandemic, just funding wise, is it easier to persuade people to do passive housing, or is it harder? Because I totally understand down the road, passive housing would save you money, but would people be like, oh, I want to hold onto my wallet, or that type of deal? Or are they gonna be like, oh, we need better ventilation, we need better house? Or just out of curiosity, like individual wise, government wise, what's the funding like after COVID?
So these projects were not benefited from any COVID related shifts, but there's no doubt that there have been a lot of people asking about ventilation, right? So ventilation is pretty critical. And I feel pretty confident that this is a better ventilation strategy than building code. And I think there's also a lot of funding that I believe is going to be coming at all kinds of levels to very intentionally address that issue, ventilation in buildings, existing buildings, you know, in the future of the code. So I think that's right. I think it's important, and I think it's only going to get more important.
And I will say, so MassCEC, I see a question about how we get this going in California. So the MassCEC, which is a really big, that's big money, right? That is a fee on everybody's electric and gas bill that goes into an energy efficiency fund. And that program not only tries to retrofit existing buildings, but it tries to get new construction to do better than code, right? So it makes sense that they would incentivize. And I do think a lot of other states have that kind of structure. This $3 grand per unit and the pre-construction like assistance is not something I've seen somewhere else. I think we may be the first ones who've done things at that level in the US at least. I do know the next version of the 3-year plan, the folks who run MassCEC seem to think it's going really well and that they're getting market transformation. So they want to keep it at $3 grand per unit. So that $3 grand is not covering that full incremental cost, right? But we're still seeing 86 buildings interested in it. So I think that's, you know, you don't necessarily have to pay everything in the incremental cost. I think over time, we're going to learn how to make things less expensive through products and teams learning and things like that. So, but money's tight. It is. And there definitely are projects that had originally signed up for this program through MassCEC that just decided not to go forward. So,
yeah.
Excellent, Bev. And Graham, did you have any other questions to add on to that? Yeah, I think that, again, that incentive is just really key. And again, Graham, keep plugging Bronwyn and keep working on getting California sorted out there.
Exactly.
I know Michelle's from California, so I just thought maybe she could.
I am. You got to really, what's
her
going
'cause I
on out
know-
there? You got to rock
You gotta
it out
come.
there.
You gotta fly in with your cape.
I might need to fly in. I might
Everyone
need
in
to
the
fly in
shade.
with my cape.
Yeah.
Yep, that's my plan. Over the fires, maybe.
It's a great stuff. Okay, we're over to Scott Kennedy.
I think I'd get this right. I'm going to change my question because I'd like to follow up on the ventilation question. And I'm curious as to whether you are doing central systems or are you doing distributed systems per suite, and how you're dealing with maintenance of those systems.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're doing a whole variety. As a general rule, I would suggest that our market rate projects are individual for all kinds of fairly obvious reasons around ownership and utility bills and whatnot. And as a general rule, our affordable projects are central, which has the has several benefits. Maintenance is definitely one, like less equipment and less things to deal with, but also right sizing the systems, because right now we can't, depending on the scale of your units, et cetera, we've got oversized systems relative to what we need. So mostly central for our affordable projects, mostly not for market projects. And
are you putting any cooling in with your central systems?
100% cooling.
And are you boosting the ventilation rate during the cooling period? I've got bigger ducts, and are you running more air? Or are you running constant air all the time for fresh air?
Constant all the time. They're totally decoupled. The heating and cooling is 100% separate from the ventilation.
Okay. So you're doing all your cooling with heat pumps individual in each suite then?
Yes, or it could be central as well, but the fan coil in each unit.
Okay. I could ask my other question if you want, yeah, Sean.
Go for it, because I think it's a good one, and I want to know how they dealt with the sequencing. And so, I mean, this could turn into a whole other, another show. I mean,
do I need to turn off my screen and go do some homework really quickly?
Well, it has to do with how you actually do a mid-construction blower door test on a wood frame building that's got hollow floors. And so far, we haven't done one. We just train the trades, keep on them, and usually we have an envelope, hero there that's keeping track of stuff for us. And we've actually managed to be successful so far without a mid-floor door construction test. So other than townhouses, that's a different problem.
I think scale matters, and I would say, I'm going to turn it over to Tom. I would be unbelievably terrified if we didn't do something early-ish, even though we know it's not perfect. So I'm going to turn it to Tom to talk about that process.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a great question, and I think the best laid plans, really, when it comes to sequencing that test. I think that involvement throughout the construction administration is a big part of that, so that we can, as verifiers, have our eye on when we can do the test. Because we're really, we have a general sense that we want to do it during midpoint as soon as we can. And we're kind of keeping an eye on when there's enough of the envelope together that we can button up the open spaces, open spots, and do the test. So for this one, the midpoint, essentially we had 4 stories of wood construction over a steel and concrete podium. And the last things to get buttoned up were the top and the bottom of the building. So we could pretty neatly isolate most of the units in the middle of the building, the wood frame portion, which had received their air barrier and were further along, temporarily isolate those to do the test. One thing I didn't talk about and didn't show any images of either is that, and this is another third-party consultant for window testing, which is a must on this type of building. I have to say, this is the first window test I've ever seen that both the air and water infiltration on every window type passed on the first try. And that gave us some confidence that a potentially very worrisome component might not deliver at the end of the day. And so we're kind of adding up those things. Another midpoint method we use is less to derive an actual leakage rate and more just to derive kind of a problem area. So we're starting to use theatrical fog testing to identify gaps and cracks and penetrations that we can't see in visual inspections. Might never come up, do that test. We might never get an actual leakage number for an area, but we might be able to focus our attention before everything is fully buttoned. And we have to remember to call the fire department beforehand.
But I just want to add to that, if I could, because we had unbelievable weak points in extremely small areas, which is just often the reality, right? It's those weird small transition points that something goes awry. So it was I honestly was just looking at the detailing yesterday as I was reviewing the presentation, and I was like, how is it possible that we got air infiltration through that wall? It should not be, right? That was not the intention. But there it is. So a lot of times the best laid plans, you know, ultimately there's a weak point, and being more and more cognizant about what could be the weak, what could be that vulnerability. And in the case of, you know, this project, that little fog test was kind of critical. It was critical because we were trying to chase such small stuff, and we really needed to understand where the air was going.
Maybe I'll sneak one in. Did you do a duct air tightness test?
Yes, absolutely. So the central ventilation system was tested. It was also completely sealed with AeroSeal, which for a big, complicated ventilation system is really a lifesaver. And the in-unit systems tested as well, not AeroSealed. So big shout out to the HVAC contractor on very tight distribution ductwork for the space conditioning systems.
So a quick question here. How important was inter-suite leakage? And how did you test for that?
Yeah, so that is actually something that we, and ICON is very experienced detailing. You know, a lot of the work we do going back many years is LEED multifamily building certifications, which include compartmentalization testing of units to a pretty tight number. And so there's actually much more experience getting to unit airtightness than there is whole building in this market segment in Massachusetts. And so we tested with a blower door at the entryway to each unit. And we also do, you know, it is also our MO to do a midpoint as early as possible on the most accelerated unit to identify weak points there. Those all passed with flying colors right away. It was great to see. I think, you know, experience doing those details and more experience in the industry with that location.
Yeah, I mean, and I would just add that, I mean, you know, exterior air tightness continuity or transition continuity for your Passivhaus envelope has its own set of nuances, and you know, compartmentalization is a definitely different set of details that is not as crazy robust, but is not that hard to execute if you just kind of put it together on the page and make sure that everyone understands. And so we've been regularly, we pass that with flying colors, and it's, you know, and it's sort of a reminder that, wow, that exterior infiltration is really the critical driver.
And so, Tom, given all the blower tests that you guys did, how many Sundays were you on this job site? Because, you know, that machine is rolling, you know, Monday to Friday, probably half the time on Saturday. And so I'm assuming you're only doing these blower doors on a Sunday.
That is a great question. And, you know, not only are we finding kind of times to do them when you can't shut down a site, right? There's not a day to spare. So these we're actually coming in at the end of the workday and testing into the evening. So we didn't have any weekends, okay, which was great. We do a lot of testing over the past year in isolated air purification suits for safety because of the current pandemic. And now that vaccines, et cetera, we have been able to lose those suits, which makes everything a lot more comfortable when we do the testing. So yeah, it's, but squeezing them in, most buildings, yeah, we're on Saturdays.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we were doing mostly late afternoon when generally folks are off site, but of course there's a lot of prep. Right?
Yeah.
So,
and I almost kind of think too, just from how you described it, like the mid constructions are almost like micro mini, you know, mid constructions, because you're looking at specific floors, specific suites. And I know when Scott's going for his blower, I mean, he's just literally holding his butt the entire time the project goes on and crossing his fingers he's going to hit this number that he wrote on a piece of wood, you know, on the first day that it started going. So I think there's definitely some lessons learned for all of us here. Thanks, Wayne, for the question. And we have, sorry, Elaine. My bad.
Hi.
There we go. Thanks.
Yeah. we're in the middle of evaluating proposals for a 46-unit affordable housing development in Wellfleet, Massachusetts. And our RFP made passive highly advantageous. But we've had some questions about the ability of our local contractors to do this work. I mean, we would love to use local contractors. We've had questions about what the tenant learning curve is to successfully live, you know, in the right way in a passive environment, how it affects their bottom line, and then also how it affects the developers' costs and incentives. A lot of questions.
Yeah, no, so I would say, let me just recap. So you want to understand the developers. Say it again. I'm sorry. One more time.
Well, we had some concern about local contractors being able to do this work,
yes.
how they can be educated along the way. We want them to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But we also had heard that, you know, when tenants inhabit a passive building, you have to have a learning curve of making sure, you know, that's just some things we've been told.
Yeah. So I would hit the. So yes, I would definitely hit the, so on the contractor side, it is 100% true that there are just not a lot that have this experience yet, especially at scale. Depends on the scale you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But I really believe that every contractor can execute this if you've got a design team and a communication mindset, including the owner, that really is just, we're going to figure this out. What do we need to, what are we trying to achieve? What is getting in our way? How do we find the most cost-effective way to get there? I really believe that it's not different from most other projects. It's just that you have explicit goals and a target, and everything's dialed in according to that. So, you know, I think that I do believe having a contractor on board early, even if it's for pre-construction services, is hugely valuable. Like I cannot say enough for pricing assembly alternatives, system alternatives, you know, depending on the market, the location, there's a lot of nuances to that. And there's not always one right answer. And I love Passivhaus because it's not prescriptive. So we have to hit it in the way that makes the most sense where you are. So I don't worry about the contractors as long as you've got a team that is completely committed to that kind of collaboration, and a contractor that's open-minded and wants to learn.
And Michelle, this team had never done Passivhaus before, right? Groom
had never done Passivhaus.
Total newbie.
Yeah, I should have said that. Yeah. So this one, so I've done 3 now. None of those contractors had ever done Passivhaus. It was a struggle in all cases. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't easy, but they, you know, but we got there, and frankly, they'll never go back. They will always be better for it. And from now on, they're going to know how to do it. So we're in a very weird crossroads, and then we're just going to be done with this, and no one's going to worry about, oh, who knows how to do it and how much does it cost. We're like, of course we're doing Passivhaus. Of course we're doing all electric. Of course everyone can build it. And now we'll be talking about embodying carbon. That's where we're really going, but that's just, we're not quite there yet. And then on the resident side, I actually think that's really an interesting question. And I don't feel like it's a big learning curve. I feel like it's very important to have a manual of some kind. It should be very short and sweet, that articulates how people get, you know, their heating and cooling, how, you know, what's happening, maybe that they never touch, that's just going on, that they have really energy efficient lighting and appliances, but basically they have a thermostat. I mean, and they can open or close their windows. There's not like a lot, as long as they understand that the building's supposed to work for you. The systems are supposed to work for you. So if you feel like you need a little fresh air, open the window. And if you don't, then The system's going to do it. So I just feel like we need to communicate that and not let them feel like they have to do a lot. They don't have to. That's the whole point. They shouldn't have to do a lot. We've baked it in.
Right.
Michelle, from a big picture perspective, when you're looking at the performance of the entire building, what's the low-hanging fruit? What was the biggest thing you found that made a huge difference? Like, was it chases? Was it the exterior envelope? What made the biggest difference?
I mean, I believe that if you cannot feel confident in your air barrier, you will never, ever, ever get there. Doesn't matter what you're doing for exterior insulation, doesn't matter what great systems and efficiencies you identified. If your air barrier is not successful, of course you can't pass the floor door test, so there's that. But I mean, more fundamentally, your systems are designed to rely on that.
So what little things within the envelope though? Was it the membrane? Was it the taping? Was it the labor, attention to detail? What was the...
Yeah. So let me backtrack for a second to Finch, our first affordable passive house project, where we did a mock-up, a window mock-up, and using what we'd specified, and we all sat there literally watching for hours. It was just actual torture. And realize like there is no possible way that this level of detail and execution can operate with 98 units and all these penetrations. Like, it's just not possible. We'll never get there. And so we completely rethought the air barrier after doing the window mock-up, and actually changed horses altogether. I'm a huge advocate of SEGA. I don't think they're the only one that can do it. But what I love about SEGA, beside their 100% support, is that it's super easy. It's super streamlined. It's almost all vapor open. So you don't have to worry about a bunch of really important building science aspects of how you're tying in your windows and your walls. It's really stressful to make those decisions. And SEGA makes it so easy. They're not the only one. They're my game right now. Everyone I'm just trying to do SEGA. We won't be doing SEGA on some in the future. We'll probably be using Zip. We use Zip on the Distillery. It's possible to, but I believe that make it simple, make it vapor open if you can, please, which makes me really terrified of Zip-R. And make the tapes and everything just seamless. Don't require, anything that requires another layer or a caulk, something that has to go down first before you tape. That's just insanity. We can't do this at this scale. Like, maybe at a single family scale, you can take the time and work your way around the envelope, but we can't do that here. So I think the air barrier is kind of everything.
All right, I have some announcements of upcoming events before we get back into, before we hear from Bev and close it up, and then do Q&A into the after hour for folks who want to stay. So tomorrow, Passivhaus Maine's Fall Forum starts. I believe tomorrow evening it kicks off, and then on Thursday there's a full day of a la carte online seminars, and that continue into building tours on Friday. So please check it out. There's a URL down there at the bottom. And then on Monday, we have our Passive House Component Spotlight featuring Inotech Windows and Doors. And they're going to be talking, Mike Cairns is going to be talking about their new PHI certified windows and doors. These are manufactured in North America, brand new certifications. So lots of good information on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Here's a link again for that. We hope you'll show up and learn about these cool products. And then on Tuesday, we have Construction Tech, and this will feature Ed Sloop of Walsh Construction speaking about the living building office that PA Engineers is commissioned and is building for itself in Portland. So Walsh Construction is the builder, and we're going to be learning about the passive design strategies and how those are being implemented in the dirt, in the field on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday for the Global Passivhaus Showcase, we'll hear from the design team from Kathy Berg of ZGF Architects and Mark Bruni from PAE about the design approach. And we'll be able to dive into that. So it'll be a really great 1-2 on living, building, and passive house. And these are, you know, kindred spirits, because both of these approaches to buildings are about really deep gains in performance. So it'll be really, I think, very interesting to see those commonalities and the way that the approaches might be novel as well. And then finally, we have the Tower Retrofit Symposium with Passivhaus Canada next week as well, September 22nd and 23rd. At the end of the day on September 22nd, the Accelerator, Sean and Sydney and I will be hosting a social gathering. So please check out this symposium, and there's amazing tower retrofits happening in Canada, a wealth of knowledge and expertise to be shared. And it would be great to see you at Passivhaus Canada next week too. Thanks.